La di da, la di da, la la. The time has finally come. We're talking about Woody Allen because he has a new movie out, Coup de Chance. Hi, this is Karan from Los Angeles.
And this is Alex from Los Angeles, and welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but we're both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we cover a filmmaker, actor, director, or other creative who shaped our love of movies. So join us as we explore why they matter to us before reviewing the three movies in their filmography that made the biggest impact on us. It's Woody time. So we've covered several Woody Allen movies in previous episodes. Manhattan on our soundtracks episode, Annie Hall on our episode in New York, Radio Days on our episode in comedy, and Midnight in Paris on our travel episode. But I think we made several references, at least I have, about having to caveat every time, like he's not a favorite filmmaker of mine, despite his troublesome reputation nowadays, which we definitely will touch on. But I think it's great that we finally have a chance to just let a full episode be all about Woody. I mean, he definitely is one of the more influential filmmakers of the 20th century for sure. And is, again, despite the things that we'll get into it in this episode that are sort of troublesome in his personal life, I do think he will stand as one of the great filmmakers of the 20th century, again, despite my dislike of him.
Now, this is a hard one, because at the center of it, there is this thing of artist versus art. And I'm nobody to sort of tell to anybody like what they should think, because everybody has their own opinions just in general. But I think this is also a very personal matter that everybody has their own way of kind of dealing with this. And all the movies that you mentioned that have been on our podcast episodes, guess what? They were all my picks. So clearly, Woody Allen's movies, they've had a huge impact on me. And as time has gone by and all of his stuff has come out, I've had to honestly even question my own liking for his stuff. And for a while, I even distanced myself from watching his movies because I was like, oh, I don't know if I should be even doing this. And isn't watching these movies supporting something that maybe is not right and such. And I think, regardless of sort of where the legal proceedings stand, there's definitely something weird there. There's no question about that. And all I can say on that matter is that all sides and all parties involved just seem to be from like a really broken family and a broken setup, which is just sad and just bad. But I come back to the artist versus art. And I think in this scenario, I've reluctantly, begrudgingly made the decision, at least for now, is that, you know what? These movies have meant a lot to me. And my introduction to cinema, which people who've listened to this podcast before, to at least Western cinema happened way late in life. And a lot of his movies were my intro into movies and relationships, movies about relationships, New York. Like there's so much. And then over the years, sort of seeing countless other filmmakers, the entire genre of rom-coms, the entire genre of New York movies sort of pay homage to him. It's significant, right? And so where I've come to is that I'm going to appreciate these movies for what they are. I'm going to critique the movies and really focus more on the art as opposed to the artist.
Yeah, I think you're right in that this whole concept of art versus the artist is something that personally each person has to have their own take on. And even when we were going into this episode, I was trying to think of like, hey, what would be my framework for this, even just in
Mhm.
general, like putting Woody Allen aside, because there's a lot of filmmakers, musicians, et cetera, that I like that have troublesome past, like Hitchcock, for example, very abusive on set, not necessarily a lot of bad stories about him. And then I sort of realized there isn't even something I can come up with of one general rule. It's just like I really just have to take each individual artist on their own, his or her own merit. And then the one thing I was thinking about of like, okay, well, it would be easier for me to distance myself from artists that I like, which again, Woody Allen was not an artist that I liked, if the art reflected their quote unquote crime or something. Like if someone
Mhm.
was turned out they were like a Nazi, which I mean, maybe I'll get canceled for saying this, but I don't like Nazis. Bold take. But if their work then reflected like a Nazi sort of point of view, then I would feel like their work sort of is the reason why the person is bad in the first place.
Mhm.
But if their work is not the same as why they were canceled or whatever word you want to call it, or problematic, it's easier, I think, for me to pull those two things apart. But again, it is very difficult for just really anyone, I think. And it's something where you just have to also give your fellow film fans the grace of like, well, just because you were still a Woody Allen fan and still see his movies, don't necessarily mean that you co-sign to everything that may or may not have
No.
happened. I think that is something that is, I definitely believe in that piece of it. I just never really connected with him much as a filmmaker, which actually in this episode and watching these movies, rewatching the three movies that I'm bringing to the table, and then watching the ones that you brought to the table, and even seeing this new one, I have a better understanding, I think, of why I don't connect with him. I understand him more as an artist and the things that he, over galvanizes New York, mocks LA a lot, also
Mhm.
mocks like waspy intellectuals, which technically I'm not a wasp per se, but that was the environment I grew up in, New England private school, etc. Most of the movies, that was really interesting too. He has little digs at like communists and left wing ideologies, like out of nowhere sometimes. So maybe it's that I just feel kind of personally attacked it. And that's why I've never really connected him much as a filmmaker. Though there is an aspect to him, and we'll get into this when you get into my films that I'm bringing to this episode. There is a part of him that I do kind of connect with, which is my introduction into him, and then it was more of the side of his art output that I think you're bringing to the table was the side to me that just never really worked for me.
My intro into movies and Hollywood movies and Western cinema, I think owes a lot to Woody Allen movies. And I think some of it has to do with because I grew up watching Bollywood films, which are at their core are basically romance movies or rom-com movies. I think, of course, there's music and action and thriller and what have you, a whole bunch of other elements to them. But through the song and dance, the most highlighted element of those movies, I think, is romance and comedy in that order. So I
Mm-hmm.
think my natural tendency is towards those genres, at least at that time. Of course, I've evolved as I've grown older and watched a whole bunch more. And we'll touch on the movie that was maybe the first movie that I can remember that I saw of his in the theater and the impact that it had on me. And then that sort of started the journey of me going back and watching a lot of his stuff. And I don't know, there's something about what you were saying, it worked well on me, which is I can see that he's being acerbic or, sometimes aggrandizing the New Yorker, pseudo intellectual, but also making fun of it, making fun of, maybe the far leftist, but also making fun of the far rightist. Like there's a lot of layers in there in terms of his like comedy. But what I always took away from his movies were through all those nooks and crannies of comedy, you could see human relationships. And I think that's his genius to me, is that he can say something very true and real about human relationships in this facade of either comedic one-liners or punches or physical comedy or a very meta sort of concept or something outlandish that, oh, we are going back in time, or this person literally broke out of the walls of the projector screen in a cinema and walked out of that. What would that look like? And so there's always some like outlandish punchline or meta concept at the front of it, but then that allows you to go and have a good time, but there's something real that you take away about human relationships. And then I think it took him a little bit to become a director, and he's a writer first. And maybe he's been modest whenever I hear his interviews, at least from back in the day. He would never call himself a director. But the truth is, like, you don't get to make movies like these, which have, like we say a lot on this podcast, like amazing mise en scène, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the acting is amazing, the cinematography is amazing. There's so much of great visual styling that's sprinkled throughout his movies, the things that we take for granted now, split screen dialogues and, subtitles written in front of somebody saying really what they're thinking as opposed to what they're saying. Like all of these things are now commonplace, but he sort of started those. And then not to mention set design, what people are wearing, in some cases, the actors brought their own looks to the movies and they became like, iconic through these movies. So there's like so many elements, which is what makes somebody a great auteur, a great director. So I think all of that really grabbed me, I think. And then I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier is that seeing over time, whether it's Nora Ephron or Albert Brooks or Judd Apatow or any rom-com director that you can think of, taking a page from his book or sometimes the entire book That's been really fun. And in many ways, I think the rom-com genre, or my favorite genre, which is like the genre of like human relationships, whether you put it in a science fiction movie or you put it in a drama or you put it in a comedy, that's what I go to the movies for. I think a lot of it traces back to his movies, and that's why he's meant so much to me. And then I guess the last thing I would say is that his New York movies, though I hear you, they can be annoying and such, but these movies came out when New York was portrayed as this grimy, grungy sort of place. And he sort of positioned New York in a totally different way. And the truth is like New York is has many, many sides to it. And you watch a Scorsese movie, you watch his movies, and you watch A Dog Day Afternoon, and you get a whole picture. I'm sure there are many others that I'm not mentioning. So that's kind of fun, that his movies has a big role to play in how we perceive New York, whether true or not.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting getting into the movies because that we get into because it's when he gets into the deeper stuff that is when I pull back and it just like
Yeah.
it and not because I don't like movies that do that, but I just grind against like his POV on the world and relationships and all those sort of things.
Mm.
I think what'll be fascinating is because he is such a multi-layered artist and does a lot of different things, even someone who's not a huge fan of his, like there are still parts of his filmography that I do like, and just comparing them to the three films you're putting on the table, I think are shows us as that we are very different people, but also that Woody Allen can make very different films in his filmography. He's not just cranking out the same movie every single time, even though it's the same similar point of view, same artist, but the movies can be very different and hit both
Mhm.
of us. I mean, it's not like I dislike these movies that I'm bringing to the table to you. I don't. So it'll be fun to get into that a little bit.
And with that, should we talk about his latest movie, Coup de Chance?
Yes, let's dive into it.
All right, so quick logline on Coup de Chance. Two young people's bond leads to marital infidelity and ultimately crime. Starring all French actors that I'd never heard of before. This movie, I think, debuted at some film festivals late last year and is finally now coming to theaters and VOD and such this year. This movie, I think some would say, if you can, remove the artist from the art, it's like a breezy, fun romance sort of movie. It's looks beautiful. It has like a great cinematographer behind it, as Woody Allen tends to do. He works with great cinematographers, so it looks beautiful. I think it's very well acted, but you can sort of feel that even though it's breezy and totally fine, and maybe it does have some ideas behind itself. I mean, the name of the movie in English translates to Stroke of Luck. And the point of the movie essentially is that you don't know what might happen. Luck plays a big role in your life, and good things can happen, really bad things can happen, and what have you. And though it's a fun concept to play with, and I think a younger Woody Allen back in the day would have played with this concept in a much different way, just made it a lot more zippier and snappier. Instead, this movie sort of feels kind of eh. That's sort of what my take on this movie is, that it was totally watchable, beautiful to look at, well acted, like I said, but for the most part, it felt sort of draggy and just didn't have much of a punch, to be honest. And we might get into a movie which does have a punch to it, which is sort of around something similar. And this movie maybe tries to be that, but doesn't get close.
Well, this might be an odd twist to start this episode out on, but I think I liked it more than you did. It
Oh,
sounds like.
wow. Huh.
Yes. So I am not very as familiar with his filmography, and I found this to be in like it held my interest. It was
Yeah.
enjoyable. I think the issues that I had with it were around the tone was kind of odd. Like it definitely feels like a light sort of like romance where yeah, there's infidelity going on, but you never really feel that there's much of a problem with it. And then all of a sudden there is, and there's actual murder that takes place, but the murder's played for kind of laughs, sort of. I mean, there's
Mm.
this breezy music that plays over it. He uses some fun editing between a painting with a guy with like his head cut off, and it head is probably being cut off, and they cut home to the painting at the time. So I'm like, am I supposed to be like laughing basically? Like one of the people just got killed. Like it was the tone was very on, and the music was very lighthearted and fun, even though the movie went to some places that were pretty dark. So that I still don't exactly know why he chose that odd tone difference. But I found the film, yeah, like I liked the characters. I thought they were very interesting. One of the things that when we get into these other films of Woody Allen, that always is a major irritant to me when either Woody's in the movie himself playing himself, or there's a
Right.
Woody surrogate character that essentially just is Woody Allen talking, and I just
Right.
cannot stand that. And this movie didn't have any of those. I didn't feel
Right.
like any character was a stand-in for his point of view on the world. And we'll get into this more when we talk about one of the movies you're bringing to the table, but I think it's a very interesting dialogue that this movie has between that film, where the major themes of chance and luck are both at play, whereas this movie has a more, I felt, optimistic take on it.
Yeah.
Then the other movie was definitely a lot more nihilist. But I don't know, I appreciated that. And your point on the cinematography. So I actually honestly didn't really even realize how visually interesting his movies could be, Woody Allen's movies, until this episode, to be perfectly frank.
Oh, yeah.
And Vittorio Storaro, who did the cinematography for this film, is one of my favorite cinematographers. And he just did an incredible job with the color palette, as he always does in this. So
Amazing.
I found it visually interesting to look at. I mean, yeah, it's not I wasn't knocked off my feet by this film, but I found it perfectly serviceable and interesting other than that tonal piece of it. Did you feel also the tone was kind of
Oh
odd?
yeah. I mean, this is very Woody, like his movies are off. I can sort of hear his voice for good or for bad in my head. It's like, you know what, then what happened? Like he had an affair and then she died and then that. Sort of it's like a very like a New Yorker cartoon,
Mm,
basically.
mm,
That's sort of his sensibility and tone. And sometimes this translates really well on screen and sometimes it doesn't. And I think in this movie, which is sort of lighthearted and breezy, when like really bad, heinous things are happening, it just sticks out. But when you're trying to kind of just meld that with happy, breezy music, it just is feels weird. But I'm very familiar with this sensibility of his. It
mm,
just doesn't land very well in this movie. But I agree with you. I think it held my interest. It was beautiful and very breezy. I just think he, in his younger days,
hmm
just had so much more to say, and there's so many layers and depth to his movies that this doesn't. And this is
mm,
a very interesting concept, and I do totally agree. Like it's more optimistic, which is not something that Woody is known for. I mean, sometimes he's done like happy endings, but oftentimes he hasn't. So it's nice to see that, but he could have played a little more with the layers of this movie, and those aren't there. But you know what? As I'm thinking about it and talking to you about this, not every movie has to be that way.
hmm
Sometimes, like watching a beautiful movie set in Paris, looking at beautiful people, going through some of the other trouble, what have you, could be a fun time at the movies. It's just that I wanted more. I think that's
mm.
where I come at.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. As someone who probably would have seen this movie anyway. I mean, you would have probably seen this at some point, right? Despite the
Probably, yeah.
podcast. Whereas I
Yeah.
never would have.
No.
I didn't even know this was coming out until I saw, oh, a new Woody Allen movie on like a digital rental. And I never would have seen it if it wasn't for this podcast. And yeah, I'm glad I did. I mean, I thought it was a enjoyable short film just with that tonal issue. And Paris looked great. I think that I liked the setting of, and again, this is something we'll get into when we get into the six films we'll discuss, but taking Woody Allen out of New York to me makes him so much more palatable. I think that the New York piece of it to me just becomes very irritated and obnoxious very fast. And I like that when he's able to step outside of that and just frees the movie from a lot of the baggage that I don't particularly like when it comes
Yeah.
to him. So yeah, I mean overall, I would say as someone who's not a fan of Woody Allen, I would recommend this movie to just because again it's solid, but I think to your point, it's not very deep. So if you are
No.
coming into this expecting something much more akin to the six films that we're going to be bringing forward in a second, it's not going to satisfy you there. I mean, maybe it's just his age where he's like, you know what, I don't need to do
Yeah.
this kind of thing anymore. Or maybe he just he's like, look, I want to take one sort of more lighter film, even though
It
it's
could be
about
that
infidelity
too.
and murder. But
That's true. Yeah.
he makes it somehow, a bit. I wouldn't really call this a comedy per se, but the
No.
uh the tone of the movie is a little comedic sometimes, which I
Yeah,
thought
it's
was
lighthearted, sort of.
lighthearted.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a better
exactly.
way to put it.
And you know what has to say again, separating him out, like this is an 88-year-old man, and to be making a movie that feels like this, which is light on its feet and such, there is something to that, I think. How
Hmm
many people in their 80s would want to even do this, but then also make something like this with a young, fresh cast that doesn't look boring or dull. I think there is something there. I guess I should say this because we are living in this age of, older directors coming out of the woodworks, or they never left.
Right.
They
Still in the
continue to
still in
make,
the woodwork. Yeah,
still in the
they're
woodworks,
in the
they add
woodwork.
it.
Yeah.
And he's definitely in it. If all of this stuff around him was not clouding him, like we would be celebrating, like, okay, some of the great filmmakers, Scorsese and such, like they're still at it, but
Right.
obviously this is not the case with him.
Yeah, fair. I mean, he's not like Scorsese is probably just as old, maybe a little younger by a year or so. And he just
Younger.
put out a
Yeah,
masterwork last year. We talked about
exactly.
that in a previous episode, Kill the Flower Moon. So this is not on that level. But I don't also think this is
No,
some embarrassing entry. And
no,
again, I'm not as familiar with his filmography, but I wouldn't
it's
be
not
embarrassed.
embarrassing.
Yeah,
No.
for him on this. It's just,
No. And if
it's
this is his last movie, I think, and I've been thinking about that with all of these guys because they are
mm,
getting there, like I
yeah.
would be okay with it because, these are his core texts, right? Infidelity,
Yes.
murder,
Yes.
love, relationship, the complications behind those. And those are tropes. And usually what he does is that he uses these like out of the world, heightened tropes to then go deeper and say something. And in
Mm.
that there is comedy and drama, and this movie is not super successful at that, but at the same time it is sort of forwarding the things that he's always been interested in. So for that itself I would be okay
Yeah,
if
it's
this
just
were his last movie.
sure. He's a true artist,
Yeah,
and artists typically have a point of
they
view on the
return to
world,
their
and
themes,
they put
exactly.
those themes in all the work, and that's what
Yep.
makes art so interesting.
Okay, so to get into the list, if listeners have not listened to what we've been doing, so we basically cover three categories. First Love, which is basically the movie that each of us watched and made the most impact on us from this filmmaker. Number two, a masterpiece that each of us think is sort of their masterwork. And then a wild card, which could be really anything, something that was different or unique or a total disaster or something that pushed them to a different, stratosphere. It could be anything. So, with that said, Alex, what is your first love?
The movie Sleeper from 1973. And the logline on this movie is a nerdish store owner is revived out of cryostasis into a future world to fight an oppressive government. So, obviously, written and directed by Woody Allen and starring Woody Allen and Diane Keaton. So, this was definitely the first Woody Allen movie I saw. I was a young teenager. My dad, who was a big Woody Allen fan, showed me this movie first and was like, you should watch this. And I think it's just because of my age. When you're 12 and 13, a movie like Annie Hall or Manhattan isn't you're not going to get it. But this stuff, which very much slapstick, owes a lot to silent film comedies, very
Mhm.
zany, very off the wall, and goofy and silly. I think that was the right into kind of introduction to Woody Allen's filmography. So this is what I first knew him as, like as someone who is very big in physical comedy. Like I said, this movie I think is an homage to like the Marx Brothers, which were famous 30s and 40s comedians who I really loved their movies too before even coming to this film Sleeper. Even the score of this movie is a very zany sort of silent film-esque score, which is definitely you can tell what the homage is. But I do find this movie the concept is funny of a guy waking up in the future when he was probably supposed to be like in for a routine medical procedure or something. I think he does a good job in as the main character of this sort of guy who you don't expect to be leading a revolution or like the last person you'd probably want to be defrosted in terms of dealing with a future, and has some honestly it's like some very funny gags in it. I think one of his funniest jokes he's ever done is this robot dog that just sort of like walks around like, I am Rags, I am robot dog. I just literally like laugh at that thing harder than anything else that he's done in his filmography. But there are other things this movie touches on too. Like a lot of his movies, especially early on, these zanier ones, like Bananas is another movie that around the same time that I saw right after this one, that do have a lot of political messages in it. Even though he kind of backs away from that a little bit, but he's making a lot of political statements, making fun of revolutions and how really they're kind of pointless. He sort of wags his finger at them a little bit and, jokes on, the left wing and communists and things like that. He even gets in some hate LA joke in there too, which is pretty funny. So there's still the tropes that are in there, but I don't know. I just was able to, as a young teenager, kind of connect to this movie and find it really funny. So that was my first introduction to Woody Allen. Before we get more into it, when did you first stumble upon this film?
Yeah, I'd never seen it. So his
Oh,
like
cool.
early block of these sort of zany comedies, I'd never seen them. So I've known him as sort of, the relationship New York movie director. So this was kind of a new thing for me to experience his like zany, out and out comedy sort of movies. And it was really fun, honestly. Like, first of all, like what they did on a low budget, which you can sort of tell in the beginning, but then I think you kind of surrender to, even though the movie is zany, but you are transported
Hmm.
to wherever this is happening. And I think that's pretty cool. And even some of the futuristic things that they have, like it's funny, but there's something kind of deep and even real behind them. Like that the fact that you would go in like a chamber that'll give you orgasms,
Oh,
like that's pretty amazing and hilarious, I think, at the same time. And a lot of the robot stuff, like you mentioned, like him masquerading as a robot, I thought that was really hilarious and funny. And what these people are interested in this futuristic life, like it has a lot of commentary on kind of the materialism of people, right? Like how
hmm.
materialistic people have gotten, and human connection, human relationship, and even human pleasure is all instant. Like he's
Right.
making those commentaries right away, right? And it's like super funny. Also, it's sort of funny and odd for me to see him be so zany and do all this physical comedy, because I've primarily known him as like an older person and
Mm.
40s onwards, I guess. Even in the movies that he's in, he's not usually like jumping around and falling about. So that was kind of fun to see all of that. And then of course Dan Keaton holds her own totally. Their chemistry is great right off the bat. So that was really fun. Yeah, I guess what I would say is that it's a fun movie, and like I was saying earlier, it has a lot on his mind. Like it's not just a movie about nothing. And yes, he's making fun of the leftists and communists. He always does that.
I know.
Anybody's on like the extreme sides, but he's also at the same time making fun of authorities and the fact that okay, you have to go against them. And I think it's interesting to me that you gravitate towards that one message only, versus to me it's he makes fun of everybody, which is what I love actually, because I think we live in a time where only make fun of one side, you can't make fun of the other side. So I love that he makes fun of everybody. Nobody is spared.
There's a certain sort of like liberal boomer point of view that he has that is definitely irritating to me a little bit in terms of his political messages. But I think that's not the point necessarily of the movie. But to what you were saying, there is a lot of things going on here. I mean, I think actually
Hmm.
his earlier works sort of is a lot of sort of like frat boy humor in the sense of you're doing dumb, silly things, but you're still in college and there's like you are smarter than this, but you don't care. You just want to do something fun and silly. But there is some intellectual stuff in there too, which I also kind of gravitate towards that type of humor too, like
Yeah.
a Monty Python, which is really goofy and silly, but they're very intelligent and they know exactly kind of what they're doing and the things
Yeah.
they're saying. And I think Woody Allen, especially in this beginning part of his career with this movie Sleeper, exemplifies that for sure. And they're able to make comments, which is another reason why I think this works really well as a sci-fi movie. That's a genre where you set in the future, it's really about the present. And he's doing a
Right.
lot of digs at, early 70s sort of uh, pop culture and ideologies and things. And it's just fun to see that and dated in a way because we're not in the early 70s anymore, obviously. So it's interesting to see what was sort of bothering them at the time. But I think it makes for an interesting movie that is a fun kind of time capsule, but then also in a way of the larger themes about fighting against authority, but then also like kind of being skeptical of revolutions and revolutionary leaders is can be timeless in a sense. But
Exactly, because
it's
both those statements are true to me. They always will be.
it depends. I think it
Yeah.
depends. But it is a fun. I think I hadn't seen it honestly since I was a teenager. It's not like I
Mm.
rewatched this movie a lot, but I saw it a couple times when my dad introduced me to it and liked it back then. And I still think for me it holds up. Like I don't get irritated by Woody Allen the way that I do in some of his more quote unquote mature films. And I think it works. Like he's a good physical comedian.
Okay, so my first love or first impression movie is Midnight in Paris from 2011. Quick log line. While on a trip to Paris with his fiance's family, a nostalgic screenwriter finds himself mysteriously going back to the 1920s every day at midnight. Starring Owen Wilson, Rachel McAdams, Kathy Bates, long list of people in this movie. So yeah, as an intro movie to him, I'm pretty sure I'd seen some stuff of his before, but I can't remember it really. I'm sure I'd seen scenes of Annie Hall or Gershwin from Manhattan and such, but
Hmm.
I don't think I'd seen a full movie start to finish. And all of these themes in this movie about nostalgia, wanting to find a different time, that might make you happier than the time that you're in is something that I really connected with. And it sort of opened my mind to something which is the true message of the movie is that actually, no, you have to make happiness in the now. Because guess what? When you go back or go ahead or wherever in that time that you think might be the happy time, soon that'll become the now and you'd want to go somewhere else. So it has something really deep to say. But like I was saying earlier, it's happening in this really fantastical kind of concept of, this guy, Owen Wilson's character, like jumps into this car and is taken to these places in the 20s and meets all his literary idols, and all these people are hanging out. And even though this is, and it sort of plays a trick with the audience too. Like, is this really happening, or is this just in his mind, or is this, what is this, And I love that sensation that the movie is able to create. And then you're excited. Oh, who else is he going to meet? And do they know what's happening in his current world? And they sort of do, because the two time frames then start to connect in a way. And then, of course, what's happening in his current life of, Rachel McAdams and her family, who are sort of right wingers, and there's a lot of digs at them. And then there's Michael Sheen, who's sort of the pseudo intellectual type, who's traveled a whole bunch, who's the other extreme. And it's really fun how those two sides are put against each other. And it's really fun to see Rachel McAdams, who, by the way, is brilliant in this movie. It's extremely annoying, but that's her character. Like, on one
Right.
hand, she's like, oh, if I had any more butter or cream, I'm going to die. But at the same time, she's really wowed by all the things Martin Sheen has to say, and that he's really poking fun at people, that people associate themselves with one side without really fully interrogating it, and they just seem beholden to that. Meanwhile, they are hypocrites all across the board. This is so relevant, so timely to me around now, especially the people are like, oh, I'm this, and I'm like, no, actually, you're quite rich and you have all the things, and just because you went to some rally one time, that doesn't absolve you for anything. You haven't solved any problems. You're just gonna go and have your, you know, $80 brunch right after. So, what's changed? So there's a lot of that in this movie. And then I know you said this. I agree that Owen Wilson is playing a Woody Allen surrogate, basically, but I think he does a very good job at it. This is the one surrogate which I think does a good job because it's situated in the movie really well. I think where it sticks out is where the character doesn't belong in the movie. In this movie, where this person is sort of bewildered but is sort of not very confident, and why are you in this marriage, there's like all of these things, and I think it works. And Owen Wilson makes him a full person, goes beyond probably what's even on the page. So I don't know, I love this movie. It's breezy, interesting, charming. Everyone's great in it. Looks beautiful, once again shot beautifully. All the 1920s stuff looks amazing, from costume to set design and such. So yeah, it's a fun time. And of course there's Paris and France, which is, if you want a little trip there, this movie affords you that too.
Yeah, so this is the second time I'd seen this film. The first time was
Yeah.
for our episode about travel, which recommend people go back and listen to that if you love
Oh
this movie.
yeah.
We'll talk about it in a different way. But I have to say, it was interesting too watching this in the context of the other films that I was bringing to the table, like reminding myself, oh, yeah, he has done sort of this more like sillier type, like a sleeper, like we just talked about. That's a side of Woody Allen too, because one of the things that didn't work for me the first time I saw this was sort of like the acting and the goofiness of those like characters from the past. Just to me seemed silly and like didn't really work with what I thought the movie was doing. And now in this time, just sort of reminding myself of like, no, like I think that's the point. Like they're not supposed to be
They're not
realistic
real.
depictions of any of these people. It's almost like characters in his head of what he might think these people are like. And then that part worked a lot more for me on the second watch, which the movie did improve in my mind in terms of what I thought about it in the second watch of it. And it was really just that getting over that of like, God, Adrian Brody's doing such a ridiculously
I know.
hammy and kind of bad parody performance of what he's trying to do there, and all that stuff just didn't work for me the first time I saw it, even though the other things that you mentioned did actually, from like the cinematography, the France stuff. But
Mhm.
now I sort of can stomach that a lot better, just reminding myself, oh yeah, this is like Woody Allen is not always been this more self-important kind of guy of these, these other movies that he's done more recently. He does have that like goofy side to him. I think that was what he's trying to do there. And I will also agree that I think Owen Wilson as a surrogate for Woody works a lot more because it kind of like tones down some of the there's such opposite personalities. Like
Yeah,
Owen Wilson would never play a Woody Allen type in any other movie. Like he's a Texas guy, you
yeah,
know, it just does not at all strike me as someone who can spit out Woody Allen dialogue. So when he's doing it, instead of it feeling out of place, it actually makes the character more palatable to me and feel like less of a caricature, which sometimes I feel like Woody,
right.
his surrogate characters are just caricatures of himself.
Exactly.
He feels like a more well-rounded, like actually believable character in this world. And I think that casting choice, I don't know where that came from of putting Owen in this movie, but I think it really elevates the movie.
I totally. I mean, he's worked with Julia Taylor his entire career, who's this casting director, and I would say pretty much most of his movies are cast perfectly. Of
Hmm.
course, there are misfires here and there, but like considering the amount of movies he's made, like it's amazing how he seems to have, his hand on the right person. So yeah, I agree. Like he's great. But on that point of kind of the caricatures, this time when I watched it, and I'm sure this is no hot take, maybe this is all a dream because all happens at night. And he's like constantly thinking about his novel that he's writing. And when you're thinking about and writing something, you tend to kind of dream about those things as well. I don't know if that's what he's saying, but it could be that. And hence, in a dream, all these people will be heightened and they'll all be in one place. I was
Right.
watching this with my boyfriend who'd never seen it before, and he's like, how is it that all of these people are in the same parties all together? And I'm like, well, that's sort of the thing, because in a dream, this might happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interpretation, and the thing that's good about this movie is it could be either or. It doesn't
Right.
like the narrative device of this time traveling car that he takes and the time traveling carriage they take later in the movie to go back even further. It's something that almost shouldn't work, but you don't really think about it. It's like the
No.
tone of the movie. You're like, oh, okay, he's going back in time to like meet these, authors from the 1920s. Oh, okay. It could be a dream or it could not, but you're not like intellectually thinking about that as the movie's going on, and you just kind of go with it. And I think a lot of that too has to do with just Owen's personality and performance,
Yeah.
where yeah,
He makes
I'll
it
follow him.
believable.
Yeah, it makes him.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'll follow this guy. I love
exactly.
Owen Wilson. He's fantastic, and I think he really works in this movie. So that casting of Owen is great. And like if this movie were made 30 years before where Woody put himself in it, I don't
Oh
think I
gosh.
would.
It would not be good.
It would be too like, self-masturbatory or something like that. These are all my idols and I get to meet them. Well, I know you're kind of doing that because it's your, your voice and Owen's character, but it doesn't feel like that as I'm watching. It feels more like, a love letter to these artists who he likes
Yeah.
and to the city. And it takes him out of the equation a little bit, which
Yeah.
is a criticism I have of a lot of his movies where he needs to be even in this movie in a way, like everyone is annoying and obnoxious except for me. Owen Wilson. Like everyone else in this movie is kind of annoying and silly, except for him. Like
I
if
mean,
if
he's
this was
annoying
Woody, it would.
too.
Sorry,
He's annoying too, I think.
oh,
Like
I don't find him that. I don't know. I just love Owen Wilson. Maybe that's
that's
why I'm
because he
biased.
makes him he that's Owen Wilson's quality, but I think he's annoying too. Like, can you imagine meeting somebody like this who's just talking about nostalgia all the time and writing a book? Like this time when I watch it, when they're making fun of him when they're at Versailles, it's mean. At the same time, I was also like, yeah, if I met someone like this in real life, I would be like, it's pouring outside in France. Do you really have to walk here? Why don't we take a cab? Like, this is ridiculous, right? So, there are definitely things here like romanticized versions, and somebody who just lives in a different world. I would want to slap them and say, come back to real life.
See, I would slap Woody, but I wouldn't slap Owen. I think that's what for me is how this somehow. It's again maybe
But
my
that's what
bias with
makes it
Owen's
work,
personality, but that is what makes it work, and that was
Yeah,
just that brilliant casting choice, which I know is a signature of Woody too. That every actor wants to work with him, and he's great with actors, and he's gotten some incredible performances and several
yeah.
Oscar nominations and wins out of his cast. So yeah, I think this movie went up in my mind on this second viewing. So I'm glad you brought it back in, and I can definitely see this being the first one that you really like connected with Woody Allen on, like why then you went down that journey immediately and looking at more of his films.
I'm glad you liked it more this time. So now we are at the masterworks. So what is your masterpiece?
So my masterpiece for Woody Allen is Zelig, a film he did in 1983. So the IMDb plot summary, a quote unquote documentary about a man who can look and act like whoever he's around. This is directed and written by Woody Allen, starring Woody Allen and Mia Farrow. So this is a film that I saw for the first time in film school. So I was in college. So
Mm,
maybe longtime listeners of the show remember that I went to USC as an undergrad. And I don't remember actually which class this was, but at the time I already had developed my distaste for Woody Allen films. So this is the one that I was like, oh great, we're watching a Woody Allen film tonight. And this movie just surprised me on how much I liked it and what this movie was. So, as I was hinting at in the description, it's a mockumentary. So this is about a person
mhm.
who did not exist in the 20s. And it's not a mockumentary in a sense of Spinal Tap or Waiting for Guffman or Drop Dead Gorgeous, which we covered recently, where there's a camera crew following around a person who still exists. This is a mockumentary of a talking heads mockumentary. So people, that have knew the main character Zelig, who Woody Allen played, as old women now because they knew him in the 20s when he first came up, and you're talking to them. So it's like a talking head mockumentary. And Woody Allen plays the main character, and it's just very interesting from a how the film was constructed, what they do to create this world, incredible world building of this. Again, it's like an alternate 1920s where there's this character who, if you put him in a room with heavier people, he all of a sudden grows a stomach, or you put him in a room with a certain ethnicity, and all of a sudden he'll turn into that ethnicity. He actually is a chameleon, and they have like fake songs that they wrote at the time, and a whole fake movie that they shoot as if it, was made in the 30s. And the world building is so incredible, and also the effects of how they were able to put Woody Allen into these as this character into these newsreels, or shoot as if it was an old newsreel. I mean, it's like Forrest Gump before Forrest Gump, and it actually looks better than what they did in
Yep.
Forrest Gump in terms of inserting him into the past. So I find it very funny. Again, I love the mockumentary format, but in this viewing especially, I really thought that there is a lot more going on here, where this character I think is sort of Woody Allen wrestling with his own identity and himself. And we'll get into that, as we talk about the film. But had you seen this movie before? What are your thoughts on Zelig? I know it's a hard film to get a hold of. It's not really available anywhere to stream right
Yeah.
now.
Thank you for making it available so I could watch it, but I had not seen it. Again, this goes in that early camp of movies, and I was blown away by, like you said, the world building. And I wanted to Google several times that did this person really exist? Like that's how convincing the movie is, even though I know this is not real because it can't be, it makes no sense. But this is how amazing the world building is, and what they did technically, but also with the storytelling, because all these elements of the talking heads, but then showing you the actual footage, the coverage, also the voiceover, it all kind of works really well. And you never leave the documentary format,
Mm-hmm.
which I think the commitment there is pretty strong. Because because it's Woody Allen and I know, I was like, oh, are they going to break that conceit and, come out at someone and say, oh, haha, this was all fake? No, like it stays in this mold. But you're right, like it has a lot of depth to it. You can take it for what, and this is we talk about this on the podcast all the time, which is that great movies are movies that you can just enjoy for what they are, or you can enjoy for their technical abilities. But if you really want to engage with them and what they're trying to say, there's a lot here. To me, like the first thing of just he becomes the people that he's around, and the reason he does that, or the reason that happens to him, is because he wants to be liked.
Mm-hmm.
There's something so human about that, again, done in like a very exaggerated way, but also so sad and lonely about that, which I think we all have that in some way or the other, and we all kind of do it. You put me in some, like, I don't know, a room of people where everybody's like dressed up and being all fancy. I start to behave that way a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and you do that consciously or unconsciously. So it's such a human thing. But then there's also a lot of great, I guess, I don't know, digs slash just highlighting the power that media plays in,
Oh yeah.
journalism plays. Like this person is kind of, people are eyeing him because he's unique and, vicariously living through him and touting him as a hero. And then it all goes to shit and then he does something which is slightly more heroic. I won't spoil it. And then the same people are back on,
Right.
which happens a lot in life.
Right.
And like you said, I think there's a lot of Woody and his life, and this is still younger Woody's, but it's funny to me that this movie, in terms of how the public perceives him, kind of spans his entire life in a way. He's always been this controversial character, who's up and down in the public perception, and now just down, down, down.
Right. Right.
So it's sort of interesting to see that. So I don't know. I was wowed by it. I laughed, but I also kind of felt a little sad about sort of who this person was, and then through him about Woody as well. I mean, there's like an empathy that this movie ends up creating for someone like this character.
Rewatching it because I hadn't seen it actually since film school because it is very hard to find. It
Hmm.
almost did feel like one of his more personal films because it really is. He's not playing himself. He's playing this character Zelig, right, who has this condition. But I do think there's a lot to read into this about just. I mean, he wasn't an immigrant, but growing up in a very strongly like Jewish background, I know that was a big how much do you assimilate into the rest of the culture you kind of want to,
Hmm.
but then you want to keep your own identity. And a lot of wrestling with that, it seems to be something actually he wrestles with a lot of his movies. I think that's why he has
Hmm.
these pseudo intellectuals that like he kind of wants to be part of that community, but then he mocks them because he's
Yeah.
jealous that he can't be because he's not authentically from there. And this movie kind of wrestles with all of that. And then I just loved the ending message of the movie where it's like this character Zelig becomes the most happiest when he finds his real self and can
Right.
not have to fit in anymore, which is, like you said, that's a human emotion. Everyone wants to be liked. They want to fit in. You don't want to be the one who stands out. But Zelig, over the course of the film and his life, because it's this fake documentary, once he realizes to love himself and just be okay with that, then he's really happy, and the film has a happy ending because of it. So I think that is a great message too, and potentially something also that Woody, I'm sure, was wrestling with as he was coming up as a young comedian and then seeing all this success. Like, how much do you want to just not be who you are, but to give the people what they want so you can get your success
Hmm.
and your fame? I think this
This
movie
art
has
thing, yeah,
a
art
lot
versus
going on.
commerce, art versus identity also
Mm-hmm.
going on. Yeah.
Yeah, especially as someone who does put himself in all, his voice is very clear in all of his movies. So he's very exposed, I think, as an artist. So that
Mhm.
a film like this means more when an artist who is putting it, so obviously putting who he is himself in all of his movies, or at least the surrogate character we talked about, playing around with identity, I think it makes it even more fascinating. So I still think this movie really holds up. Again, I appreciate a lot of the craft in it, but I also think the messages are great and very funny. Like there's a lot of really funny lines, and his humor comes across, that more zany humor that I like him comes across in this a lot. So I'm glad you were able to enjoy it. And it is something that is hard to find. If you dig around the internet, you can find some copies floating around there. I don't know why this isn't as readily available as some of his other films, but it's one I still think is his masterwork, and what I like about him is encapsulated in this film.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad to have watched it, and I would agree. It is a masterpiece for sure. And it still has all the themes that he's always played with, but just done
Hmm.
in a totally different format. And like you said, like a lot more personal, I guess. And I guess the other thing on the happy ending side is that yes, it's about liking yourself, but also meeting somebody who sees you for who you are. There's a
Hmm.
lovely kind of love kind of message in this as well. Like when this person, and it's funny because he's Jewish and that's so kind of associated with Woody Allen, and he ends up joining the Nazi party at some
Yeah,
point because
that bit is really
that's what
funny.
happens, that you've gone through all of this, and in this quest to find yourself and being liked, you've gone all the way to the opposite side.
Right.
And it's this great scene that he sees Mia Farrow's character and suddenly starts to look like himself and come out. It's such a, I mean, it's zany and hilarious, but also so touching at the
Hmm.
same time that, oh, this is the person that sees me for who I am. And then suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, where am I?
Right.
So, and the things he says to his kid, and the proclamations he makes on, for the journalists and interviews, like just be yourself and such. And it's pretty sincere actually,
Hmm.
which is not something I expect from Woody because he's always, like you said, mocking himself and undercutting things and also hyping himself. Like he's not often sincere. You're supposed to look for the sincerity and the truth in between. Here he says it as is, which is kind of amazing actually.
Yeah, and I wonder if it has to do with a lot of the fact that there's a lot going on in this movie. Like there's a world he built, there's fake this, fake that. So there's enough distraction so that he can be more
Mm-hmm.
exposed on that sincerity.
Mm,
Instead of using his humor to put up those walls, it's like the structure of the film and the form of the film that he's choosing to use. But I agree, yeah, there is a message of love, sort of someone loves him finally so that he can then
yeah.
love himself is a great message too that I just yeah, I still like this film. Definitely recommend folks try to find it. So moving on to your masterpiece, what is your Woody Allen masterpiece?
I have a very predictable answer, which is Annie Hall from 1977, starring Woody Allen, of course, Diane Keaton, Tony Roberts. Quick logline: Alvy Singer, a divorced Jewish comedian, reflects on his relationship with ex-lover Annie Hall, an aspiring nightclub singer, which ended abruptly, just like his previous marriages. I mean, this is sort of his core text of like relationship trouble, somebody who's neurotic, constantly through a midlife crisis, does not trust himself. Um, Bunch of different people come through his life, women is primarily, but also his friends, his one guy friend that we see. And it sort of just doesn't work with really anybody until he does find somebody in Annie Hall, Diane Keaton's character, where there is something and something works, and how he and the circumstances sort of blows it all up. And yes, it's heightened and zany, and in this period, not as zany as I guess Sleeper and Bananas, but it is heightened because archetypes are being played and highlighted, whether it's New Yorkers or people from LA or Hollywood. Like everybody is heightened, everybody is a New Yorker cartoon in their own right.
Hmm.
But through all of that, there is something to me very real about relationships and humanity, is that you have to take that leap and you have to trust yourself and you have to make room for relationships, almost like an anti breakup movie, if you will, because by seeing how he handles things, you sort of start to realize that, oh no, you had it good,
Hmm.
and this is what not to do. And through all this, of course, what shines is Diane Keaton, I think, who, of course, there's the iconic clothing and all of that, but you see like a true arc of this person who, from the first scene when they meet, the la di da scene that I mocked in the beginning of the podcast, she's sort of unsure and just wants to be whatever he wants, and kind of lives in this apartment, and I don't know where her life is going, and then is always sort of feels that, oh, maybe she's not as smart as him, or is often made to feel that way, even though he's not trying to do that, but he is sort of trying to do that by telling her, oh, you should read more books or do this, and finally she comes into her own, I think, by the end of the movie, where she finds what she wants to be. So you see like a full arc of her in the movie, which is, it kind of sneaks up on you. It may not be apparent because his jokes and one liners and all of those, they take center stage, and I think that's the genius of the movie. And then of course, there are all the rom-com things which have now become tropes of, like I alluded earlier, of the, both of them with their psychologists and having these split screen moments and subtitles to indicate what they're really feeling as opposed to what they're saying. Like there's just so much, and just New York and the music, her singing, like there's just so much in this movie that you can just unpack for a long, long time. So yeah, I think just for what this movie is and what it's kind of imparted to the genre of rom-coms, like this is a masterpiece. And I think whether whatever you might feel about Woody Allen, I think this movie, you probably know of it or you've seen a derivative of it. You can't escape it.
Yeah, I think objectively, this has to be his masterpiece, right? Like this is what he'll the first film listed in his obituary will be this one.
Hmm.
And I think despite the issues that he's had and the public perception of him, like this movie will, I think, stand out despite that over the course of time. I definitely agree with everything you said. This movie just still never works for me. Like I just I can't get behind him in this movie being incredibly annoying, and I just don't get Diane Keaton in this. Obviously, either just doesn't work for me. Like I don't know, I don't care about their romance. I don't understand why they're attracted to each other. It just like none of the things that need to work for all the rest to work just still don't for me. I've bumped up against this from like the first time I saw this back in high school because it's like, oh, this is like one of the biggest movies of all time or most famous. And obviously, yes, it is historic. It had changed the game for the genre and all these sort of things. And there's very inventive style, like the animation portions and the
Oh
breaking the
yeah,
fourth
what about
wall,
that? Yeah.
all that stuff is there. And it still feels fresh, even though now it's been done to death, all these techniques. I don't know. I can't get past Woody in this movie. Just I don't care about him. Just he's too obnoxious in this for me. I don't know. That's just like this is the quintessential like example of why I don't connect with him because I don't connect with this movie. If there was one movie that, should still work for me despite my in his filmography, it should be this one. And because it doesn't, I think that's just why I'll never really love him as a filmmaker and an artist because I can't like can't get past this. Yeah, it's hard. I'm not doing a very good job of articulating it, but it's one of those
No,
things
I.
I just don't, it doesn't work for me, but I get why it works and why it is
Mhm.
the movie that it is. I'm not trying to say it's a bad movie in any stretch at all. It just, I just don't care. It's like, I want it to be over. Like 10 minutes in, I'm like, I don't want to be with these people anymore. Get me out of here. I'll just leave me in LA. Those people seem much more interesting to me than Woody. But yeah, I know we talked about this movie before on our
Yeah.
New York episode, but it's a little, we're expanding on it a bit here. But yeah, that's still my thought. I gave it another try. You never know, right? But that still just bounces right off me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it, right? Like if this movie doesn't land, I don't think any of his stuff is gonna land because
Right.
this is sort of core text. It's the kind of the apex mountain, if you will, of all of the stuff that he stands for. So that makes sense. I think what I would say is that I think that is the point. Like these people are insufferable and miserable, and they end up screwing what they actually have in life. And that is the point
Hmm.
of the movie. Now, you still have to go through that in watching them. And that can be funny, but it can also be grating. And it depends on sort of where you fall. I find it funny and then often insightful because it sort of exposes something that we all have in ourselves, I think. I have definitely had moments in my life where I've said to, you know, people that I love who are stuck doing the same thing. And I'm like, wouldn't it be good if you like read a different book, maybe, maybe not in that way, but I've said annoying things and I've caught myself. It's like, oh my gosh, like what am I saying? This is horrible. I should not be saying that. Or judging somebody or just saying that I don't think you're that smart. Are you? You don't get it. Or what have you, right? So we all have these things. They come out, and most of us who are decent enough to, do a decent enough job, I hope, to kind of keep those sharp edges inside this in this movie, and I guess in the Woody Allen persona, if you will, all those sharp edges are out there always. And sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're grating, and sometimes they expose something truthful about all of us. That's how I read this.
No, that's a good, summation. I still just can't. I don't know. I'll keep coming back to it. It's definitely a movie where I will come back to it every couple of years and be like, do I still find the characters insufferable and too like pompous
No, the
and
answer is yes, they are
maybe
meant
yeah.
to.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's not what I want out of my
That's the
romantic,
thing.
romantic comedy, I guess is the thing.
Yeah.
It's maybe I'll have to change before I do like this movie. Again, I appreciate it, and I definitely
Mhm.
think it is doing some groundbreaking things for sure. And I recommend if people haven't seen this to definitely give it a shot. I mean, it's one of those like movies to see before you die for sure. I'm not like saying it should be in jail. Like everyone should be jailed. It's not one of those movies which have
Yeah,
come up on the podcast before. It just I bounce. It's like oil and water for me with this. So, but I'm glad you brought it in. I mean, we need if it's Woody Allen, you have to talk about Annie Hall. And
exactly.
I like that you like the movie so much. It's great. I mean, it's a very it's yeah, it's a I'm definitely a minority. I'll say that with this one. I know there's some people, have again problems with Woody Allen or maybe don't like his movies, or this
Yeah,
is the one that usually kind of breaks through. But as you can see from my list, I like more of the other side of him than this
yeah,
one. So
yeah.
maybe we'll give it in our episode in like 3 years on something else. I'll give it another shot, and who knows, I might all of a sudden be a big Annie Hall fan.
No, I get it. I totally get it. Like I said, what you're bumping against is the point. The question really is that do you want to stay at that point and does
Right.
that become enjoyable or not? And it's not, and that's totally okay, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah. That's why
Uh,
we have these discussions, and what makes this
exactly.
an interesting episode.
Okay, so wildcard time. So what is your wildcard from Woody Allen's filmography?
My wild card is probably the wildest of his movies, I feel,
Gosh.
is What's Up, Tiger Lily from 1966. So the IMDb plot summary. A Japanese James Bond-esque spy flick reused and redubbed into the plot of a secret agent searching to uncover a recipe for the world's greatest egg salad and Woody Allen's directorial debut. So, yes, he did direct this movie, also was one of the co-writers. And I wouldn't say well, I guess he kind of stars in it. There's some scenes where he actually is on camera, but just to make it a little more clear, I don't know if the plot summary kind of made this clear. What Woody Allen did here is he took a Japanese, like kind of James Bond knockoff movie and redubbed and re-edited it into a comedy. So the dialogue he is putting in over the dialogue of the people talking, and it's the plot has been changed to something totally different. So you're basically watching another movie with additional dialogue. And this movie, I heard of this in when I was in college because there was a movie that basically did this exact same thing that came out in the mid 2000s called Kung Pao Enter the Fist. Someone took a kung fu movie and did the exact same thing Woody Allen did, though this is a more advanced technology, so he actually insert himself in the shots, much like a Zelig, actually.
Uh,
And I loved this movie. It was super dumb. It was a giant bomb, but me and my college roommates were like obsessed with it. And then I was reading online, like, oh, this is basically the same thing as a Woody Allen movie. I'm like, wait, what? Like, I don't like Woody Allen. What is the Annie Hall guy did something like this? Is no way. So I tracked this movie down, and it is basically, yeah, it's the exact same thing. And it is crazy. It doesn't always work, but I love the creativity involved in what Woody Allen's doing here is very different, very out there, very 60s. And I still think for what it's doing, it still is effective to me. I laugh at this more than I do with some of his other movies. And I just love the spirit of this. Again, it's getting back to that thing I was talking about with Sleeper too, where it's definitely like frat boy humor in what's going on here. But I don't know. I think it works. I mean, it's not a masterpiece or anything like that, but I still find it funny. I don't know. Is this a movie you'd seen before or heard of?
Never heard of, never seen it, and was like when I read the description, I was like, oh my gosh, and then read more about it. I was like, this can't be true. This is a gag, is it? Or but yeah, I agree with everything you said. It's like it's zany and it's out there. What I appreciated this movie for was just his like sheer creativity and even guts to
Hmm.
do something like this. Like and it shows somebody who's like up and coming, younger in their career, not just because of the humor, but just to go all out and
Right.
do something like this. And I don't know, I always appreciate people who do that, and the results can be mixed, and it has to be, it may or may not jive with your sense of humor or what have you, but I still think it's a pretty bold, creative statement, which is kind of works actually. So I was happy to check it out. And I wish more people would do that. It sort of subverts itself, I guess, because obviously the plot is different and the dialogue is different, but what you're watching is obviously different. So it sort of creates like multiple layers, of you're following a different story with different emotions, different voices, but then the culture and what's happening is very different. So in some ways, and I don't know how much they had this in their mind, it's actually leveraging all the aspects of film, which is visual, it is based on a written text, it
Hmm.
is vocal, it is audio, it's all of those things, right? So it's sort of playing with the medium in a very interesting way that you can look at it as a collection of all of those things, but you could also separate it out. Like I could mute the whole sound of this movie and this movie would feel something else. It will
Right.
feel like what it probably was originally, right?
Hmm.
And the fact that it's a knockoff of James Bond movies has like another meta layer to it because now this is another layer on a knockoff of a James Bond movie done in English, which is what the James Bond movies are in. So there's like so many layers to this, which is I don't know how much of this they had on their minds, but it's a great experiment, I should say.
Yeah, I think that's a good word for it, like experiment. And it is something that, I needed reminding of, and maybe the big Woody Allen fans or people who are more familiar with their filmography will think I'm like kind of stupid to say this, but I sort of forget how experimental he is with the form and so many of his movies. I mean, even going to
Hmm.
Zelig, which was 20 years later, and he's, you alluded to the was it the Purple Rose of Cairo when the guy comes out of the screen, right?
Yep.
Yeah, like these are not just guys, walking around New York talking set in reality. I mean, even Annie Hall had those moments of
Yep.
animation and breaking the fourth wall. So he is very experimental in his films. And that's something that at least I don't associate him with that. I think of him more of like, oh, great dialogue, basically just people walking around New York City and you just film a day in a life kind of stuff. But actually he's a lot more yeah, experimental, takes chances, does crazy things. And this movie is the perfect encapsulation of that for sure. I mean, it's something they had to. I mean, I might be untrue in saying this, but I don't know if anyone's did this up until then. Kung Pao into the Fist in like 2003, 2004, whenever that came out. So it was so ahead of its time in that sense too. And even the humor and how they were kind of mocking the movie a little bit. I mean, I think I mentioned this on the podcast before. One of my favorite shows as a kid was Mystery Science Theater 3000, where they make
Hmm.
fun of the movies. And this is kind of that same type of humor, and maybe that's why it worked for me even as a college student. But I find this to be a different side of Woody Allen, but also then setting the some key components of a lot of his other films that is fun to go back to. I hadn't seen it in 15 years probably, and we watched it for the podcast. And yeah, it still is fun and interesting and feels fresh and something different. Like you're in a party with a bunch of cool people before they became famous, kind of is the
Yeah.
vibe that I get out of this.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, totally. You know, the other thing it made me think of, like growing up in India, there was a time when all these like Japanese shows, or I guess Korean shows, I forget, but they were coming to Indian television
Hmm.
and they would obviously be dubbed in Hindi. And I
Oh,
still remember there's this scene where everybody's like dressed in kimonos and traditional, I guess so it was Japanese. Yes, absolutely. So they're dressed in kimonos and traditional Japanese garb and they're going to a restaurant and they're like in Hindi, but they're basically saying in Hindi that, we can't wait to try the chicken tikka masala. And the thing that's referenced is chicken tikka masala versus, of course, what they're eating is, noodle broth dish.
right.
It's so hilarious to me. I kept thinking about that watching this movie, that this has probably been going on for a long time, right? Like you live here and that doesn't often happen, but like because the US is the center, if you will,
Uh-huh.
of media entertainment, but this has probably been going on in other parts of the world since the beginning of times where things get there and then they are translated, but not everything gets translated in the right way, and it leads to a whole bunch of mockery and fun.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison to this. So again, like Zelig, a movie that's hard to find, but if you dig around the internet, there are places where you can watch the whole film for free. Again, I don't know why rights issues or what have you, why this isn't as readily available, but check it out, especially if folks haven't seen it before. Okay, so we got the last movie now, which is your wild card. What is your wild card, Woody Allen? Karan?
Yeah, so my wild card is Match Point from 2005, starring Scarlett Johansson, Jonathan Rhys Meyers, Emily Mortimer, a bunch of other people. Quick logline on the movie. At a turning point in his life, a former tennis pro falls for an actress who happens to be dating his friend and soon to be brother-in-law. Yeah, so I put this movie Match Point as a wild card because although it's dealing with similar themes that Woody Allen has always dealt with of infidelity and human relationships and love, but there's something else going on here in this movie that almost doesn't make it feel like a Woody Allen movie. It has this, first of all, the movie is extremely sexy. And it has kind of this darker, very bleak look at life in general. It's obviously playing a lot with kind of class dynamics, having set in, Britain, where this is obviously, a core text in general. And there's like a propulsiveness to this movie, which is not something you typically feel in Woody Allen movies. Woody Allen movies are breezier, even when they get a little bit darker. There's jazz music, you sort of soak in the dialogue and what have you. This movie doesn't have any of that. This movie is sort of hard hitting. It feels like a younger man's movie, actually. I'm When I first watched this movie, I was like, I can't believe like somebody, I don't know how old he was when he made it, but the fact probably was 60 plus, very at the very least. Like it doesn't feel like an older person's movie at all to me. So that's why this is a wild card. And I think this movie is kind of amazing. It's dark. It's playing at this class dynamic war, of, especially with the lead character, Jonathan Rhys Meyers, who is a tennis pro who's in this kind of rich world, is very ambitious and wants to climb the ladder and very purposefully surrounds himself with the right kind of people. And, through that gets a job, marries the right person. But at the same time, there is something broken in him. And when he meets Scarlett Johansson's character, who's sort of similar to him in a way, who doesn't come from wealth and money, is also looking for something bigger and more in her life, but she's failing at it. And the two sort of form this bond, which is, I mean, they're cheating. I mean, he's definitely cheating, like bad, because he's married and is having a child and what have
Hmm.
you. And she's even more broken in some ways than he is, because she's, needy and what have you. And well, I guess he's more broken, I should say, given what he's doing. But they're both really broken characters who just are drawn to each other because they're from, I guess, similar class or similar dynamic. They have similar needs, and they think, I don't know what the plan was when they start to, get together. I think maybe that's the point. There is no plan, because
Hmm.
for him, the plan has always been to be rich and have this life. She has no plan whatsoever in life, but they somehow just can't quit each other. And that's sort of, the demise of everything. And then before I kind of come to the conclusion of the movie, which is an even darker ending, I want to invite you and see if you had seen this movie before and what did you think of it?
Yeah, I'd never seen this before. I'd heard, oh, I know you don't like Woody Allen, but watch it, watch it. I'm like, eh. But I thought it was amazing. Like, I think this is his best movie that I've seen so far. Like,
Mhm.
just it's a very well done thriller that
Yeah,
keeps you interested because there's twists and turns like in any kind of good thriller. But there is a much larger point that this movie is making about chance and luck and all these sorts of things, which again we'll get into, especially compared to his most recent movie. Actually, these are
yeah,
brilliant pairings because they definitely talk back and forth with one another. But the thing that surprised me the most about this movie was, and again, correct me because you know a lot more about his filmography than I do, but the visual metaphors he was using around, the opening shot of the tennis ball going back and forth and hitting the net and bouncing off,
yeah,
being something random, and then the same thing with the wedding ring, that happening. I'd never seen him use that type of symbolism that wasn't for comedic effect. Like it felt like a filmmaker, making a point visually, which is something that I tend to like when filmmakers do that. And I had not seen, I didn't think that was something that he liked to do. I mean, is that accurate or is it totally wrong? Again, I don't, I haven't seen enough of his movies really to say, but it was not used to comedic effect. It was like a very like hitting the point of the movie,
yeah,
right at you, which I thought was great, amazing cinematography, and it removed all the things again that I bounced back off of, like no Woody Allen surrogate, no classic Woody Allen dialogue, not set in New York, thank God, which I guess the movie was originally supposed to be. And I was reading
yeah,
into this a little bit of like what happened here? It's like, oh, actually, it was for tax reasons. They went to UK. I don't think the movie would at all have been as good because of all the things you're mentioning, like the British class system.
I'm sure he rewrote it to make it fit
Maybe.
for that
Okay.
place. Yeah.
But the theme I think fits a lot more
Yep.
because it is set in the UK. So obviously, which is just luck and chance that the movie got moved over
Yeah.
to England, and I think it forced him to write something. I just was really liked this film. And yeah, just I will definitely be watching this again, and maybe we'll just climb up just outside of Woody Allen's filmography, just in terms of my own personal like kind of film ranking. I just really was surprised how good this actually was.
I had a
Happy to
feeling
finally
that
see it.
you would like this movie because it actually doesn't feel like a Woody Allen movie, even though the core themes are there.
Yes,
But
right,
there's no comedy and, that what you would expect, or even midlife crises or people
right.
being, mocked or made fun of. It's a pretty serious drama thriller movie,
Hmm.
but dealing with similar themes and showing, I guess, the darker side, in a funny and weird way, the rich people who he normally makes fun of, and he does that here too, but they're actually the nicest people in the movie.
Right. The parents of
The
the
parents,
rich
Emily
family,
Mortimer is
Brian
totally
Cox. Yep.
fine, totally
Hmm.
nice. She's, there for the husband and taking care of him and wants him to do well. Although, if you read between the lines, yes, they're nice on the face, but they do want him to join their class. And
Yes.
all of
Right.
the stuff that's happening, even though she's very sweet, she wants him to get a better job because I don't know if she can be with him otherwise for
Right.
practical reasons, but also the way she's brought up and all the
Hmm.
things, which it's up to you how you look at it. People can fall for people from totally different backgrounds, but of course, there's a lot of practical stuff that comes with it that just
Hmm.
wouldn't work. So maybe that's a more, I guess, positive reading on that, but it goes all ways, all the ways. You can read it the way you want it to.
Hmm.
And then yeah, like the way the movie is shot and it's thrilling, I think you put it. I never thought of it as a thriller, but you're right, it's a thriller actually, because you're on the edge of your seat as to what's going to happen. And then the end, maybe we shouldn't spoil it, or I guess we can because it's an old movie. But I did, when I first saw it, I didn't see it coming in, and even though I'd seen
Me
it,
neither.
I had forgotten it, and it makes a pretty dark proclamation on the world that yeah, bad people do bad things and they walk away.
Right.
That just happens
Right.
sometimes, which
Right.
is interesting to pair with Coup de Chance, the movie that we covered, where the bad person pays.
Right.
So these two movies, like you said, are definitely in dialogue with each other. There's similar class dimensions at play. The protagonist here is the antagonist in Coup de Chance,
Right.
and it's sort of inverted essentially. Like this is, you're watching the movie from the point of view of the antagonist, who is the bad guy,
Hmm.
which again, you would not think Woody Allen would do a movie like that. Like this could be a Michael Mann movie actually, in a weird
Right.
way. It has
Hmm.
that kind of propulsiveness and sad, lonely guy who's trapped in his own mind. Like it has a lot of those tropes on its mind, but yeah, great performances as well. I think ScarJo is amazing in this movie as this broken person who's alluring, and even the it's in the writing. Like Jonathan Rhys-Meyers says to her sometimes that why can't you be more confident in your film auditions like you are right now?
Right.
And it's so true. There's something about, we've all encountered these people who are broken, but they have this thing that they attract other people to them, you know? But then in their real life, not much comes off of them. And you always wonder why. I remember people from high school and such who were kind of center of attraction, but then they peaked. Nothing
Hmm.
really happened with them. And so it's, yeah, as usual, the movie has a lot on its mind. There's a thrilling narrative to it of, what will happen. But then, as always, it ends up saying a lot about just human relationships and how the world works sometimes.
Yeah, again, pairing it with his most recent film, I just wonder why they're both about luck and chance. And I think this movie, the message is luck and chance can happen, but there's no justice in it. It's literally pure randomness. The universe is random. Nothing really matters then, kind of like that's the nihilistic point of view. Versus in the most recent movie, there is the luck does give justice. where the person who deserves it gets the just desserts in the end of that movie. I just wonder if that means something about his sort of change in his perspective. Maybe this was a darker time in his life that he was just sort of being frustrated and I don't know. You know him better than I do. Not personally, obviously, but in terms of his films, do you think that is interesting? Like that he clearly changed. I mean, it's a very diametrically opposed POV on what luck and chance is. I'm just kind of surprised that he made such a big turn. Was this the aberration, Match Point, or do you think the second one is more of the aberration for him?
I think Coup de Chance is more of the aberration. That said, though, he's an older man now, you know. A lot has happened in his life in general, but also a lot has happened in his public life. And I mean, he can't make movies here.
Right,
And,
right.
you know, all of this has happened. So I think, and if he is guilty of anything, you're also living with that, or who knows, right? Like but old age would do that to you anyway, but he has like million other layers of things of just
Right.
living in this world. And, you know, so I think that would do a lot to someone. So there's that. And I think what I was saying earlier about Coup de Chance, like this is why the movie is not deep enough. Because I think for me, it would have been interesting that yes, the bad guy meets his end and there's justice, but not all is good
At the end of you're
because
talking about Coup de Chance,
Coup de
right?
Chance,
Because
yeah,
yeah, it's still not a happy
it's
ending,
not a happy ending,
but
but
there
the
is
movie
that
doesn't go
justice.
there.
Correct.
I
That is
right,
correct.
and I
Yeah.
wish the movie would have gone that okay, the girl, she's supposedly number one, she's lost. I mean, this is spoiler alert, but nobody cares. Nobody's gonna watch this movie, so it's fine. uh, the she's lost both the men,
Right.
and she loved them in different ways.
Hmm.
Her big source of income and everything. I mean, I guess she has a good job, but clearly she's living in a much different strata of society thanks to her husband. Like that's
Exactly.
gone.
Hmm.
And she's seen some pretty violent deaths in her life. Like this person doesn't walk away happy. This person is shattered and has lost love and has to rebuild. And I wish we'd seen a little bit of that consequence that yes, there's justice, but it's all not pretty.
Hmm.
And that would have, to me, made a more rounded movie, a more even Woody Allen movie for that matter. But yeah, it's very interesting how these two movies are in dialogue with each other. And it's almost like older Woody talking to slightly less older Woody.
You're right. It's not like his first movie at all, but
No.
yeah, I wonder if he is sort of wanting to put his different spin on luck now that he is, close to 90 than he did when he
Yeah.
was in his 60s, whatever 70s, whenever he was
Yeah.
when this movie came out. Because they definitely, even the lighter tone we were talking about with Coup de Chance, with the score being a little more like easier, breezier, whereas this movie is definitely like a very heavy drama where there's
Oh yeah.
really no levity at all, and the movie doesn't let up once it starts getting serious. When you're like, oh, wow, hey, it's having an affair. Like, okay, where's this gonna go? And then it just keeps getting kind of like worse and worse for him until all of a sudden it doesn't because of something totally random. And at the end though, he's not like he still has the guilt. He's going to be miserable for the rest of his
Oh
life.
yeah.
Like, no question. This
No
movie
question.
has a bad ending for him. And then it also has, in my view, like just a nihilistic view on the world that everything is random and then, nothing matters because good or bad, it doesn't matter. So it's like a double whammy versus at least in Coup de Chance. You're like, okay, well, her life is shattered, but there is some sort of
At
justice,
least
whether
some
it's a god
justice.
or who
Right.
knows. Fate is good or in some way and
Yeah.
just. Maybe not good is not the right word, but just. And yeah, I just think that's fascinating that this is the movie, Coup de Chance that we started talking about with this episode, and I think ending on Match Point is just a very interesting look at an artist and how he's changed over time. Okay, so in terms of what we want Woody Allen to do next, I'll let you start as the bigger fan who probably has more personal stake or care more than I do about what he does next. What would you like to see him do?
I can't believe I mean, I do believe I'm saying this, which is that I think he should not make a movie after this.
Really, you think
Yeah.
he's done?
I think it should be done. I think you're pretty old and enjoy the life that you have left, but also I think where his life is at and where his public perception is at, like anything that he puts out, good or bad, it's just not gonna meet whatever he intended, just
Mm,
given where his public perception is. I would rather just have him be known for the great works of art that he did make, and that's his legacy. And in some ways, like adding more to it kind of takes that legacy away because it sort of brings his name back to the forefront, which nobody wants to engage with,
hmm
and B, the chances of him making something that's going to be greater than what he did before, just given how old he is and such, is also slim. And especially for someone like him who's all about human relationships and how humans interact with each other, it's hard for, I think, somebody that old to stay relevant for so long. And he did for a very long time.
hmm
But even the movie that I could barely watch because it was kind of boring and a drag, the one with Timothy Chalamet, it's odd seeing Timothy Chalamet and Dakota Fanning, 20-year-olds, speaking in Woody Allen dialogue. It just doesn't work,
It's so dated. Yeah, that whole
so
time.
just
Yeah.
it's like a different sensibility. Like people in their 20s and just don't speak that way anymore.
hmm
So yeah, that's my take. Like just it's good.
And interesting. Yeah, I think you might have convinced me that I mean, I'll put it like a different way, and maybe this is sort of what you were saying too, but to like officially retire and versus him just suddenly pass away or just not
Yeah.
be able to get another film off the ground, sort of do what, like John Carpenter has said, like he's sort of done. He's just gonna play Xbox now.
Hmm.
Woody could say, this was my last movie, as opposed to make some big final statement of, oh, this is my final movie, which has a lot, that says a lot, right? If you're making the conscious decision, this is going to be the last
Right.
one, like what Tarantino is doing. This would
Hmm.
just be like, yeah, actually, like just kind of dropping in an interview or something like, yeah, that was probably the last movie I'll make. I'm just gonna enjoy my very old age now, and he has a filmography that I think is very unique, a lot like over 50, or was this a 50th film, I think,
It's the
actually, right?
50th movie, so there's
Hey,
that
actually,
too.
end on 50. There we go, actually. Damn, that's a lot of that's a lot of films.
A lot of
But yeah,
movies.
end on the round number, but not make a big deal about it, which if he already decided, this movie already came out, and just sort of be done. And then when he passes away, then there'll be at some point some more history will judge in some way what to do with his output of films, where, like I said, with Annie Hall, I still think some of them will stand the test of time no matter what, that being one of them. But it'll be interesting to see how society kind of wrestles with him, and that's less him, more the work, I think, is going to be the
Right.
interesting thing. um so okay, you convinced me he should be retired. And yeah, 50th film too. I mean, how could you not? It's like
Yeah,
Quentin Tarantino stopping at 10. You want to stop on the nice round numbers.
I agree.
So now we wrapped up our Woody Allen discussion. Our next discussion will be on an actress. So we're talking about Emily Blunt and her new movie, The Fall Guy. So we'll be talking about The Fall Guy and our favorite Emily Blunt films, and that episode will be out in 2 weeks. Come back to you then.
Well, hope you enjoyed this discussion. I know this was a tricky one. And, like I said in the beginning, like this is a very personal topic. Many of you might even just read the title in the episode and say, yep, don't want anything to do with it. And that's totally understandable. We totally get it. But if you do decide to click and listen, as always, we want to invite you in the conversation and hear what you thought about him or his movies, but also maybe other people that you wrestle with when it comes to art versus artists. So yeah, this was a interesting one for both of us to kind of talk through. So hope you enjoyed this conversation. As always, please rate us and review us. All of that really helps listeners find our show. We are here on YouTube, but also all the podcasting platforms. And until next time, see you soon.
See ya.